Welcome, all you citizens of the world. Once again, it's Michael James here in Chicago's 49th Ward up on the north side with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is being recorded on December 4th, a date embedded deep in my memory. And December 4th in 1979 was the year that the Chicago police, in cooperation with the FBI, led by the state's attorney, Ed Hanrahan, assassinated Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party. Fred was a dynamic young guy. He was the leader of the party. He really pushed the notion of the Rainbow Coalition of Black, white, Latino, Asian, Indian, everybody getting along together, working together to bring about changes. I think that the establishment was pretty worried about the emergence of a Black Messiah. And Fred was certainly a prominent and young leader, probably would have emerged in a big way on the national stage. Unfortunately, his life was taken, and that December 4th date is one I will never forget. A lot of people know about Fred. There was a film based on his life, and there is a lot of attention been given to him here, certainly here in Chicago, in the public schools. They teach about the assassination of Fred Hampton, and I'm really sorry to say that he's no longer with us. But if you want to see the movie about Fred Hampton, we have information of how you can do that. And we want to thank the Chicago Film Archives for making it available via Vimeo. The link is https://vimeo.com/434141029. Again, vimeo.com/434141029. A couple other things I want to share is one of our producers, Tom Clark, let me know that he had responded to something on the public square, being critical of President Biden for pardoning his son. And he's responding to a fellow named Rex Hupke, who said that Biden's pardon made a mockery of our justice system. Now, Tom Clark responded with, how many gun-bearing guys are arrested with no permit for said weapon and end up serving time for that crime? How many? Given the clear retributive nature of the incoming clown car cabinet, a dad did right by his recovering son. These Christian nationalists never read that part of the Bible about forgiveness. I would add that I would support the pardon. You know, Trump's going to try to pardon a lot of people. He pardoned a lot of people when he went out from his first term, and he pardoned his son-in-law's father, who he is now designated as the ambassador to France, the would-be. So I think people should get off it and not worry too much about it. You know, I think Biden, certainly if he had won the election, probably would have left his son in that negative situation, but things are different now. I'm pretty concerned down the line, and I think we're going to try to cover it as much as possible with Trump's talk about deporting immigrants. You know, back in 1932, the U.S. deported a lot of Mexicans, and I didn't have a chance to really research that, but I know it happened. And there's always been talks and threats of it. I believe that most immigrants here in this country are serving the country well, are working, pay their taxes, and have been used as a political football. And we are pretty concerned about what's going to happen. Advocates and lawyers are making preparations to defend immigrants against mass deportations and certainly against other things that Trump's going to try to do. And this matters because there's about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. In addition to mass deportation, Trump's proposals would gut how the U.S. has conducted immigration enforcement for decades. And remember that Trump got the Republicans to nix a border deal, which would have dealt with immigration, not in the greatest way, but it was certainly kind of eased all the talk and the rhetoric and retribution that goes on around it. On a sports front, there was a big fight after the Big Ten game when Michigan beat Ohio State in Columbus, I think, last Saturday. And the Michigan players tried to plant their flag on the logo in the middle of the field. A fight ensued. Each school has been fined $100,000 or so. I'm a little disappointed to see athletes fighting each other after a game and that kind of behavior that leads to that, too. I would rather see athletes united for peace, doing good in the world, bringing people together and trying to smooth over differences and correct a lot of things that are not good. And let me see if I got any more good information here. Yeah, I do. My book, Rising Up Angry, Our Fight for a Better World, has been reprinted with 4 additional pages. So there's a second edition out. And would love if people wanted to get one. They can get me at Fatback at AOL. For a donation of $50 or more, we'll send you a copy of that book. There's also a T-shirt available. And we could go on and on about that. But my emails have been just overloaded with people sending emails requesting money for Giving Tuesday. This is the day after, and we also are asking for money. Anytime you can make a donation to the Live from the Heartland show, it will help to pay for the weekly cost of this show, which we need to pay to keep it coming. I do have an announcement about an event that's going to be coming up this Saturday. So if you're listening to the show beforehand, the Edgewater Artists in Motion are having their annual sale at a place called Colvin House at 5940 North Sheridan. That's one of those 2 mansions. And this is going to be this Saturday, the 7th, from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. And I'll be there with my photos, my books, etc. I'd love if you all came out, paid us a little bit of a visit. A couple of things that you may want to know about when you're listening to the show. A lot of people have been enthused about the recent sports and inspiration reports from my cousin Adam James. He's going to be back here on the 21st with a report on all things sports. And the longtime labor organizer, community organizer, Bob Lawson, will be with us next week on December 14th. We have a lot of other people lined up. We're going to keep it coming. And if you're listening again to this before Friday night, our guest last week was Russ Bradford, and he had a new book out called Big Time. It's a novel based on the athletic department takes over Coors State University, and the English professors have to write the programs, sell popcorn, etc. It's kind of funny, but it's a serious topic that we did address recently, Cousin Adam's Sports Report. But Russ is going to be at the bookseller on Lincoln Avenue Friday the 6th, reading from the book, and he'll also be at the Seminary Co-op on Wednesday, December 11th, and that's at 5751 Woodlawn. So I think that's enough of the stuff before we take a break, do a little music, and then we'll bring on our first guest, who is, and our only guest today, Ed Mullen. Ed Mullen is a neighbor. He's been active in the ward with Network 49, as have I, and he is nominated as Chicago's best lawyer by the Reader this year. And that prompted me to say, Ed, it's time for you to come back on the show. He's not the only good lawyer on that list, but he's the one we're going to talk to today. So a little bit of music, and we'll be back with Ed Mullen talking about voting, voting rights, protecting the vote, etc. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of December 7th. And now we're going to bring on our guest, who I pumped up a little bit at the opening of the show, the one and only Ed Mullen. He's a longtime civil rights lawyer and probably has a lot of other titles. I've got to know him over the course of the last few years. Well, actually getting to be a number of years up here in the 49th Ward, where we've both been involved with Network 49. He is a neighbor, lives down the street, has a dog, and an all-around general wonderful guy. I got an email this week where he talked about having had some good accomplishments this year and being nominated by the Reader in their poll as Chicago's best lawyer. He's not the only good lawyer we know on that list, but he's our hero today. So good day to you, Ed, just out of the courtroom. I hope you got a little bit of, I know you got energy and adrenaline going. What was it like in that courtroom?
Well, it's Thank you for having me again, Michael. And I will say it's nice to be your neighbor. And I have an original Michael James photograph up on my wall.
Oh, right on.
So I walk by your photography every day in my condo here in Rogers Park. But we're right in the midst of objections to people that are running for municipal office next year. So everyone's still so focused on the November elections, which were quite monumental. But as election lawyers, we're already getting up for the next election cycle next year, which is municipal elections in all of the municipalities in Illinois other than the city of Chicago. And so anyone who's running for school board, park board, library district, mayor, anywhere other than Chicago is up for election next year. And so that's what we're fighting over, challenges to the nominations of people for those offices right now.
What do you call the kind of lawyer you are? Do you call yourself a civil rights lawyer, an election lawyer? What different hats do you wear?
Right. So there are not a lot of people who are election lawyers in the state of Illinois. It's really just a handful of people that do it on a fairly consistent basis. And because elections are cyclical, it's difficult to just be an election lawyer because it's not a big enough practice area to take up the entire time of a lawyer. So I do election law. I do civil rights litigation. I represent people who are discriminated against in employment primarily. I have a number of cases right now that arise out of sexual harassment and sex discrimination, race discrimination, and things of that nature, primarily in employment. And then I just had a case that was a defamation case that arose out of a campaign for judge out in the suburbs in the Park Ridge area. And one of the candidates who lost that race had filed a defamation lawsuit against my client who had posted something about him on Facebook. And that was a jury trial that took place here in September in Cook County Court, and he lost his defamation claim in that case. So there's a lot of different things that I do, but election law is one of the busiest parts of my practice.
Well, one of the things I think that I just learned that you were involved in was trying to keep the former President Trump and to be President Trump off the ballot. And I think I was out of town when that was going on, but you were involved with that. How'd you like to talk about that? And then maybe we'll see if you have any fears about what might follow.
Sure. So the Colorado Supreme Court issued an opinion in late December that said Donald Trump was not qualified for the ballot in Colorado because the insurrection clause of the United States Constitution. And what they said was that he engaged in an insurrection on January 6th by inciting what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, and the officers that were killed and hurt, the people breaking into the Capitol, and that was found to be an insurrection. And the Colorado Supreme Court said that because the Constitution says you cannot run for office again if you've been inciting an insurrection against the United States government, that he was not qualified to be on the ballot. And so that same case was filed here in Illinois. And we would have filed it earlier in Illinois, but the problem is that in Illinois, you have a 5-day time period to file an objection. So we had to wait until his petitions were filed and that period came. So we were a little bit behind the Colorado Supreme Court, but we filed that objection with the State Board of Elections, and we litigated that case. And the State Board of Elections found that, yes, he had engaged in an insurrection, but that they didn't have jurisdiction as the Board of Elections to decide a constitutional issue. So then we appealed that to the circuit court because everyone said it's the circuit court that's got to decide this. And Judge Porter in the circuit court ruled in our favor and said that the Constitution and the insurrection clause prohibited Donald Trump from being on the ballot in the state of Illinois because he was disqualified by the Constitution from running as a candidate for office if he had incited an insurrection. And that decision was issued less than a week before the United States Supreme Court overruled the Colorado's decision saying that he was off the ballot and said that states didn't have the authority to make that decision. So while we were successful in getting the circuit court to rule that he was not allowed to be on the ballot in Illinois, the Supreme Court's decision overturning the Colorado state ruling meant that the court didn't have jurisdiction to make that decision. Now, Donald Trump was obviously on the ballot in Illinois and lost in Illinois, but some of the issues in that case are actually still up on appeal. There were some unique issues about jurisdiction. There were some unique issues about the statement of candidacy that says you're qualified, whether you think you're qualified or whether you're actually qualified. And so that issue has gone up to the appellate court, and we're still waiting for a decision. So even though the election is over and Trump was on the ballot in Illinois, there are still some issues that might be decided by the Illinois appellate court relating to that case.
And what would that mean if it rules in your favor?
Well, it wouldn't change the outcome of this particular election, but I think what happened is that, well, let me say, there's a saying among lawyers that bad facts make bad law. And so if you have a situation that is unique, sometimes the law is bent a little to address that situation in a way that doesn't apply very well to other situations. And so what I think the Electoral Board was looking for was an escape hatch so that it didn't have to decide the tough issues. So they ruled on an issue that said, when you sign your statement of candidacy, you swear that you're qualified for the office. And what the board said was, if you think you're qualified, that's good enough, right? Not that you're actually qualified, but you think you're qualified. And that makes sense in this case because, you know, he didn't think he'd engaged in an insurrection. So, you know, when he swore that he was qualified, he was being truthful because that's what he believed. But if you apply that to something like residency, for example, if I'm going to run for the alderperson in the 49th ward of the city of Chicago, I have to have been a resident of the 49th ward for a year before I sign my statement of candidacy. So if you apply the ruling to the issue of residency, if I think I'm in the 49th ward, I'm not lying about being qualified for the office. But if I live across the street from the 49th ward, I'm actually not a resident. So what you're saying, if you apply this ruling to other cases, is you cannot be a resident of the 49th ward. But if you think you are, you can run for alderman in the 49th ward, which doesn't make sense at all. So what we're hoping is that the Illinois appellate court is going to issue a ruling clarifying that for other cases going forward.
Ed Mullen, one of the things that I saw you said somewhere in a response to you being involved with that case was that you were generally concerned about retaliation. How concerned are you, and what would that mean? What do you think might happen to you?
So when you look at what Trump has been saying about the things he's going to use the Department of Justice for, and going after journalists and going after people like Liz Cheney and people like potentially the legislators that went after him for impeachment, we're not very far down the list on the people who have done things legally to try to keep Donald Trump from being a reelected president. So, I don't know what retaliation would look like. But, he talks about putting Liz Cheney in front of a shooting gallery. So, it's hard to imagine, that would actually happen. But, you talk about being able to indict a ham sandwich, and you probably heard that back during the Clinton days. And if you can indict a ham sandwich, you can indict pretty much anyone for anything, and use the Department of Justice as a weapon to go after the people that have done things against you. And he posted on Truth Social, not our names personally, but he said the lawyers in Illinois, where he called us radical leftist lunatics, and he was aware of the case, and he posted about it. And so you have to always, in the back of your mind, wonder how far on the enemies list down you are, and what that's going to look like. But I do, I don't have enough concern that I'm moving to Canada. But I'm definitely going to watch what he does with people like Fani Willis in Georgia, and some of the people that were involved in the impeachment, and just keep an eye out for what kind of retaliation he engages in.
Yeah, it's going to get real interesting. The whole immigration thing too, and what's going to happen, the legal ramifications of all of that. I mean, we're going to be talking about a lot of it. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and it may take us to our break, but I mentioned at the outset that you have been nominated as Chicago's best lawyer by the Reader. You were also nominated in 2016, and you thought it was in large part due to your work around aldermanic elections in 2015, and you go on to say we're a turning point in Chicago's politics. Tell us a little bit about that and how it was a turning point.
Right. So the main example that I go back to when I talk about this is Alderman Sue Garza winning in the 10th Ward. So you go back through the history of the council wars and Ed Verdoliak, and you look at Sue Garza, who comes out of the Sadlowski family with the steelworkers down in the 10th Ward, and the shifting of the power from the old school to the new progressives. I think that's a really big example of that. And there was a recount in that case, and Marianne Ahern and some of the other journalists were there with cameras filming some of the recount. And I think that's why, people saw me as being part of that movement at that time.
Aha. Well, it was a change. We started to get a lot of progressive alder people, and we're getting more and more. I'm not sure what that means for the way the city's going to work.
Well, that's an interesting question, but you're also right about the mayoral race, and Chewy getting into the runoff, I think was a really big surprise to a lot of people. And I think was a trigger for a lot of people to run 4 years later for alderman and, expand the number of people who are progressive alder people in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, and it's going to get real interesting, too, to see. I mean, our current mayor, Brandon Johnson, came in. A lot of progressives were really rooting for him. It's been pretty rough road for him so far. And I dare say there'll be a number of challengers. Some of them may be way to his right. But there might also be someone like Chewy running again. I don't know. I'm just throwing that in there. A long time fan and friend of Chewy Garcia.
Right. Well, what's interesting about the city of Chicago elections is that when Harold Washington won, we had a Democratic primary and a Republican primary. And so someone who was to the left could win the Democratic primary and then win the general election because, there were more Democrats in the city of Chicago. And it changed to a nonpartisan election. And what that did was it increased the power of the people on the right and potentially the power of the people in the middle of the city. And I think part of that was a reaction to people not wanting another Harold Washington, the people writing the laws and in power, not wanting another Harold Washington to be elected. So, it is more difficult for someone who is further to the left to get elected in a nonpartisan system than it is in a partisan system where they could win the Democratic primary and then win the nomination generally. So I think when you look at the reelection in Chicago, the people on the right, particularly if there are a lot of candidates, are going to have more sway in who goes on to the runoff. And I think that's a big reason why we had Paul Vallis in the runoff and not Lightfoot or Chewy.
Yeah. Any predictions on who might run or how it might come down, or do we save that for later?
I have not, I think there were a bunch of names thrown out in Politico, but I have not heard or seen anyone really making moves to publicly act like that's where they're going to go.
Well, the question of who's going to be Chicago's mayor after this current term, we'll have to address that in the future. We're going to take a musical break, and we'll be right back with more Ed Mullen. We're talking about election law, elections, and we'll get into more details when we come back. Enjoy the tunes, enjoy the station ID, and stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or wherever you're getting the show from. Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. I'm still Michael James, and I'm still here talking with my friend Ed Mullen. One of the things, Ed, that I'm curious about is your thoughts about Bring Chicago Home. For people who don't know, we had a referendum or a vote in the city that we lost that would have brought money to deal with homelessness. And a lot of us thought it was going to be a great plan. It got stopped. Give us your take on all of that. What happened and where we go from here?
Sure. So right now we've got a serious budget issue with next year's budget and inability to fill the budget hole with revenue that does not come from increasing property taxes. And what Bring Chicago Home would have done is increase the revenue of the city and use it for homeless services from real estate transfer tax on tax of homes that were sold over $1 million and then a little more over homes that were sold for 1.5 million. And, we've tried to get progressive revenue solutions through referenda because that's under Illinois law, the only way that we can get some of these progressive revenue solutions. And so we had the Fair Tax Amendment going back even further, and that won in Chicago, won in Cook County, but it lost statewide. So we don't have a graduated income tax in the state of Illinois. So this was a secondary idea to bring in progressive revenue and try to raise money for homeless services, which would take some of the burden of those services off of the general revenue fund. But that lost as well. I was involved in that case from the point where the real estate industry filed objections to the referendum and the language that the city used to put the referendum on the ballot. And so they went before a circuit court judge, and the circuit court judge decided that the referendum violated the Illinois code and was written improperly. And so once that decision was made by the circuit court, I had been working with the proponents of the referendum and kind of monitoring that situation, and had actually been on a number of the television stations talking about both the legal and the policy implications of Bring Chicago Home. And so they asked me to do an amicus brief. And what that is a friend of the court brief. So when the city appealed the decision that said Bring Chicago Home should not be on the ballot, we filed a brief that said it should be on the ballot and explain not just the sort of technical legal reasons why, but also the policy implications of what the decision the court made would be on the people of Chicago. And so the appellate court overturned the circuit court's decision and found that the Bring Chicago Home referendum should remain on the ballot. And so people were able to vote on it. And while it was a fairly close election, it did not it did not pass. And I think it's a problem that folks in the city of Chicago and around the state, they don't want their property taxes to go up. They don't want to pay more in taxes, but at the same time, they are rejecting some of the solutions that would make people who have more money pay more in taxes, so that people don't have to pay more in property taxes. And I think that was a disappointment politically that it didn't pass, but legally it was a success in getting it on the ballot so that people had the ability to vote one way or the other on how they believed on the referendum.
Well, Ed, you bring up both the graduated income tax, which lost statewide, even though it won in Chicago, and then Bring Chicago Home, which lost in Chicago barely, with a lot of money put up against it by the real estate people. I'm wondering if you think there'll be attempts to do these two things again, or some new version. We seem to be in a time in the country where people are looking inward and worried about their own situation and not caring about the collective, when the future of humanity really depends on us working together and helping each other. What's your sense of where things are going to go on all that?
It's hard to say, but it feels like Donald Trump has brought out in people a license to care about themselves more than they care about the collective. And I think that is going to make it harder to get some of these things passed. And I think that's why there's a lot of pushback on what's going on in the budget, and increasing property taxes and doing other things to provide for services for people in the city. So I do think we're going through a difficult time right now in terms of how we raise revenue and how we convince people who are voters and residents that government is actually something that is a positive force in the country. So on the federal level, Donald Trump has appointed Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk to slash the federal government, and people are excited about that. But I don't know how excited they're going to be when they find out, that their Medicaid or their food stamps or their retirement is being slashed as part of the reform. I think people are in for a rough awakening.
Yeah, and I think you lawyers are going to be real busy, particularly your progressive lawyers, trying to defend humanity here in the United States. Let me fire a bunch of questions at you. First of all, tell us a little bit about where you come from and how you got into being a lawyer doing voter protection and
Right.
that kind of thing.
So in 2000, sorry, I have a vivid recollection of being at a campaign event where Al Gore had been announced the next president of the United States. And I got in a car with some friends and we went to another party to celebrate Al Gore having won the presidential election in 2000. And then when we got there, we learned that they had rescinded that call and actually decided that George Bush had won the election. And I followed very carefully the hanging Chad litigation in Florida and the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore. And I was really motivated by what I thought was an incorrect opinion and a disregard of the voters' will in that case. And so in 2004, I started looking for something to try to do to get involved in the election. And I talked to someone who was working for the DNC, And for the first time, the DNC, Democratic National Committee, had decided that they were going to put voter protection programs in place in 13 swing states. And so one of those swing states was Wisconsin. And I was working for a law firm at the time. I was an associate. I went to the managing partner of the law firm and I said to him, I'd like to go and spend 5 weeks and work in Wisconsin setting up a voter protection program for the Democratic National Committee. And I was like, I've got 2 paid weeks off, and then I'll take 3 unpaid weeks if you'll let me take the time off. So he took it back to the partners, and they came back and they said, you can take the whole 5 weeks paid. We'd love to be supporting you. We'd like to go do it ourselves, but you just go and spend 5 weeks in Wisconsin and we'll let you do that. And so, I spent 5 weeks working with lawyers all over the state of Wisconsin, and there were 4 or 5 other lawyers sort of flown in from Connecticut and New York and DC, and we built this program from nothing to do voter protection throughout the state of Wisconsin. And it was really interesting because if you remember the 2004 election, Ohio and Wisconsin were extraordinarily close. And so there was a belief that if the Democrats challenged the decision in Ohio because it was so close, that the Republicans would turn around and challenge the decision in Wisconsin. So it was late into the night on election night before we ended that evening. We finally got a call at 2:00 in the morning that our efforts were in vain at that point. But we spent hours and hours working with the idea that we might need to be preserving the evidence and the count for litigation over who won the election.
So what do you actually do when you create voter protection in a place? What are the steps that you're taking, the moves you make, and what does it mean?
Right. So it has a lot of different components. One is making sure that you have people to poll watch and training those people so that they know what the rules are and how to handle those rules. The other thing is creating a reporting and response structure. So it's one thing for someone to be at a polling place and see something. It's another thing to figure out how you fix that. And so when we do it here in Illinois, so for instance, in the Cook County State's Attorney's race, we were doing voter protection. You had to have interface with the general counsel and the tech people in the Chicago Board of Elections. You had to have interface with the people at the Cook County Clerk's office who were running the elections in the suburbs. You had communications with the attorney general and the state's attorney, who had teams out on the street responding to questions where there were voter intimidation, voter harassment, or other potential issues. So you have to have a structure that gets the information into the campaign or into the organization that's doing the voter protection, and then a way to respond to all the issues by knowing who can fix whatever problem it is and getting in touch with that person. And, occasionally we have to go to court to keep polling places open late. Thankfully, we haven't had to do that a lot lately because of the vote centers. So if a single polling place is closed, now you can go to your polling place in the neighborhood. And I think it's a really important part of the election process because you have to make sure that people who are eligible to vote are actually allowed to vote. I will say that the problems that have occurred have reduced over the years. So you used to have very strong ward organizations with precinct captains who would be very aggressive about making sure that the people in their neighborhood voted for the preferred candidate of the ward committee person. And you just don't have that army and that infrastructure now doing the voter intimidation and the voter harassment that we used to see on a very regular basis. And so as some of the stronger long-term machine committee people either retire or are replaced, we're not seeing the same concerted efforts to keep people from the polls as we have in the past.
And the technology is probably different too. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we do early voting, we do absentee voting. So it's not that the voting is all concentrated at one small time where it's easy to attack the process, right? So if everyone had to come and vote on election day, and you were there at 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock when people are starting to vote before they go to work, you could cause a lot of damage during those 3 hours. And now, because the voting process is so spread out, it's harder to have that same impact on the outcome of the election.
Yeah, and I think we should thank our neighbor, yours and my neighbor, David Orr, who was the Cook County clerk for many years. He made a lot of advancements and helped influence better voting procedures here in Illinois. I feel like our votes are pretty safe here. I don't know about the rest of the country, but I think that we've got it down. And I did want to ask you one thing just out of the blue when you were talking about the Trump on the ballot case. Was Matt Pierce involved in that with you too?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Pierce and his firm, Hughes Sokol, and Karen Lederer was the lead. Matt and Karen did the lead on the arguments in the circuit court and the electoral board. And we also had a national nonprofit called Free Speech for People that does this kind of election work around the country, and they were supporting us as well.
Well, I was really happy to see Matt was involved because I knew Matt briefly when he was a young lawyer and participating in the Rising Up Angry Legal program, where we would get lawyers for people who were in various predicaments. And he was one of the people who did that. Ed Mullen, let me ask you, when you reached out to your friends and told them that you were on the nomination list of the Reader's Best Lawyer for the year, one of the things you also mentioned was that you had a lot of accomplishments this year. You want to share any of those?
Well, sure. I think I've mentioned a lot of them. The year started off with the Bring Chicago Home case and the amicus brief in that case. But there are a couple other things that happened this year. The first thing is we had our first elected school board. And so after the normal election cycle, we had another election cycle, which was to get people who were running for school board on the ballot. And so one of the things I can say is I helped get, a number of candidates on the ballot for the first time that we've ever held an elected school board race. And that was very exciting to be a part of that. One of the other things is I had a lawsuit go up to the appellate court over the language in a petition, and was successful in the appeal of that case. But what was most interesting about that case to me is it was a case about appellate judge candidates that went before the appellate court that had the two sitting judges they were running against on the appellate court. And so one of the things that we were concerned about was that, this case was going to go up to the appellate court, and we had won at the circuit court, and they appealed the decision that we won at the circuit court. And we were concerned that, you were going to have people who were on the appellate court that were going to decide whether their colleagues were going to have opponents or not. And so we were concerned about that. And then what happened was, without us even asking, the chief appellate judge transferred it to another court. So it was I forget whether it was the second or the third district, but it was not the district that the judges were in that decided the case, because they thought that they would have a conflict. And I think that's something that I give the chief judge a lot of credit for doing that, because in election cases, there are oftentimes a lot of conflicts that the people making the decisions have an investment in who's on the ballot, and you get some real snaky conflicts in election law.
Yeah, I tell you, and the whole thing about electing judges here in Chicago is just, I mean, people go into those voting booths, most of them blind to who the candidates are, who to vote for judge. I don't know how to reform that, how to change that, but some of us do our research, or we get a list from this group or that group about who are the recommended people. And then the other times it's just, for most people, they don't know who they're voting for, or they leave it blank.
Right. And one of the things I will give a shout out to is Injustice Watch, which has done a really good job of educating the public about who are the judicial candidates and what is their background. And it used to be years ago, you needed 60%. You still do 60% to be retained as a judge when you're up for re-election after your tenure. And for years and years and years and years, there was never a judge that was not retained, that it was just pro forma. And then there were a few campaigns, one of which I was involved in, the Dump Coughlin campaign, to try to get judges who were problematic, the retention vote against them. And so that was a successful effort. And then this cycle, there was one judge who did not get retained that Injustice Watch had pointed out. He'd changed his name to, I think, Shannon O'Malley, from a Eastern European, difficult to pronounce name, and he lived in like Will County. I don't want to say exactly, I don't want to defame him, but that's my recollection of what the what Injustice Watch published about him, and he did not get retention.
Ed Mullen, let me fire this one at you. What in your history of being a people's-oriented lawyer, what was your best case, your worst, and your most important?
So I think my best case, and this is mostly because it's the only one that's been decided by the Illinois Supreme Court, was a case about when a referendum becomes certified. Is it when people vote on it, or is it when the election authority says it's final? And that seems like a small point, but when there's an overlap in elections, it's not a small point. And so it doesn't sound very interesting, but it was my only case that I won at the Illinois Supreme Court. So I'm going to say that's the best case. In terms of the worst, I can't think of the worst case.
Good. Let's let that one go.
I can't think of I'm sure it'll come to me. It'll like.
Is there one that you stands out as your most important?
So there was a case called Let Forest Park Vote, and it was a case where people had circulated petitions one year to ban video gaming in their municipality, and it didn't go through, and then they circulated petitions 4 years later for the same thing. What happened was they mixed up some of the petitions from the first time with the petitions from the second time and put them all together and filed them. And the objectors said that you should throw out all the sheets for that reason. And I argued that you should only throw out the sheets that were the wrong sheets, and you should keep all the other ones. And so I won that at the appellate court, and they filed a petition for leave to appeal with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, we agree with the decision. We're not going to overturn it. And so that was, I think that was an important case. But what I love about that case is it gets cited all the time in electoral board arguments that I'm involved in. And it's always nice to be able to say, oh yeah, that was my case. So.
Well, good. All right, we got just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts, your memories about when you were a delegate to the Democratic Convention for Bernie Sanders. meeting Bernie Sanders, and maybe Bernie Sanders, he's been going off really on Trump and the Democrats lately. Any of your thoughts about where Bernie's at? Because I'm liking him more and more.
Yeah, so that's a lot. So I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders in 2016, and along with Michael Harrington and Katie Hogan, I was elected. So we were actually on the ballot along with Bernie in the primary, and the people of the 49th Ward and the 48th Ward and Evanston voted to send us as delegates for Bernie to the 2016 convention. I wrote a long piece about the convention that got circulated pretty widely, but there were 2 points that stick in my mind. One is how the Bernie delegates were not treated very well by the establishment at the convention. And the other is it was a wasted opportunity when you had so many people who were activists in their local communities. And, there were a lot of parties, there were a lot of people talking at you, but there was not a lot of organization or activism involved with the convention. And I think there could have been more of an opportunity for all of these people who've come together from around the country, who have electoral politics, who have organizing backgrounds, who are, they do communications, they do all the different things in campaigns, not to have more workshops and more things where people could work together and get to know one another. I thought that was a lost opportunity.
Well, it's time for some big shakeups in the Democratic Party. I mean, there was a time I didn't root for the Democrats or root for the government, but as I've aged, I do. You go with the lesser of evils, and we're challenged more than we have been in a while. I want to thank you for coming on. You got any parting words for the masses?
You have been at this for a long time. And, when I get tired and I get frustrated and I look at people like you and Katie and others who come before and, continue to do the great work that you do, kind of gives me the energy to say, okay, well, I'm not going to stop.
Right on, brother. I'm glad you're my friend and my neighbor, and we'll be running into each other real soon. And I want to thank everybody who helped make this show possible. Our guest, Ed Mullen, a people's lawyer, our engineer, Hal James, our producers, Tom Clark, Katie Hogan, and Lynn Orman. And, keep at it, everybody. Over and out. See you next week.